Oh, there's one. Oh, and there's the other. Come on and sit down.
Thank you.
Right, so we can get into the meat of what we're doing now. You can stop listening to me. Blair is MD, UK and International, Digital and Retail Direct for Aviva. And you can tell us something about yourself in a moment or two, Blair. And Liz, Director of Consumer Economic Growth and Energy, the Behavioural Insights team. That's the nudge unit, isn't it?
It is, yes.
Brilliant, excellent. And what we're asking them what we can learn from other customer-focused organisations. So I'm going to hand over to you, Liz, first of all.
I'm going to...
You head over there.
At the lectern.
Incidentally, if you've got any questions, we can do it in the old-fashioned way towards the end of this session, or you can submit them online, so please do that. This is a live stream session as well, so you're going to be watched at home by millions of people, and they can submit questions through the app as well.
What a way to start. Well, so thank you very much for inviting me today, and thank you particularly to the PLSA. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm a director at the Behavioural Insights team, and I lead our work on consumer markets and financial behaviour. And today I've been asked to respond to this statement and question, that scheme members are not always as engaged as industry would hope, and what are some of the fundamental idiosyncrasies of consumer behaviour, and how can industry use them to members' benefit? So I'm going to start off with some reflections on how consumers engage across various different markets. I'm going to explain some of the key behavioural biases at play across the pensions journey. And then I'm going to talk about two behavioural tools, prompts and defaults, and talk about how they can be used to benefit your members. So the first thing to say on this first point of not being as engaged as industry would hope is that lack of engagement is not exclusive to the pensions industry. People across the board tend to prefer the current state of affairs, and they tend to stick with the default. That's known as status quo bias or inertia, which I'll come back to later in the talk. And that manifests across multiple consumer markets. So we see it with people not switching their energy provider, with people staying with their mobile phone provider or their home insurer. And that's the case even where it's clearly in their economic interests to switch or to engage in the market to get a better deal or to change their behaviour. And sometimes that can be highly problematic, and that was emphasised recently by Citizens Advice, who recently lodged a super complaint with the Competitions and Markets Authority talking about the loyalty penalty, where they argue that actually across essential services markets, consumers are overpaying to the tune of around £900 a year because they're not engaged in these markets. So really there's two things to take away from this. The first thing is that when we're thinking about how to best engage members, there is a lot to learn from other markets, and I'm going to be highlighting that with some examples from the energy market today. And the second thing is that consumers are being pressed to engage in almost every aspect of their lives. So you can't design communications or policies thinking that a person's decisions about their pension are the only thing or the most important thing requiring their attention. You are competing for their attention, and that competition is strong. So you need to make it as easy as possible for them to engage in the things that are really consequential to them. Now, before I launch into some examples, I'm going to take a step back and tell you about the Behavioural Insights team, and particularly why it is that I'm talking on this panel today. So the team was set up in 2010 inside the Prime Minister's office. And it was set up with a dual mission. The first part of that mission was to apply a more realistic model of human behaviour to public policy. And when I say more realistic, what I mean is a model of human behaviour that takes into account the fact that we have these systematic behavioural biases. And the second part of the mission was to apply more rigorous methods to test what works and to test how to actually change people's behaviour. And we do this primarily through randomised control trials, which again I'm going to talk about today. So since 2010, our mission has remained the same. Those two things are the things that we focus on today, but the team's changed a lot. So we're now around almost 200 people in 6 offices around the world. We actually spun out of government 4 years ago, and we're now a social purpose company working with government, but also with the private sector across the world. And over the years, we have done a lot of trials that have focused on increasing consumer engagement. And that's why I'm on this panel today, and that is what I'm going to focus on. So, back to the original question, what are some of the fundamental idiosyncrasies of consumer behaviour? So here I've mapped them across a basic stylisation of the pensions journey for a DC pension. Now, I think I'm in the right room to say you're all very aware that automatic enrolment is one of the great successes of policy designed with a behavioural focus. As a result of the change of default from an opt-in to an opt-out system, we have almost 10 million people newly saving or saving more, and only 9% of the population are opting out. And that estimate is a lot lower than the original estimates that were put forward when the scheme was designed. And there is some escalation built into the contribution rates, but as Richard highlighted initially, I think, again, everyone in this room would agree that those are not adequate to provide a comfortable income in retirement. So during the accumulation phase, really that inertia is compounded by optimism bias and a tendency to place a disproportionate emphasis on the benefits of spending now and discounting the benefits of delayed consumption and saving for retirement. And then as we move across the journey, we see as people are approaching retirement and are at retirement, they're confronted with a bewildering array of information and very complex choices. And what we see across the behavioural literature is that when people are confronted with a complex choice set, they tend to become paralysed and they will either not make a choice or they'll make a poor choice. So seeing how those biases manifest across the pensions journey, how can industry use that understanding and put it to members' benefit? I'm going to talk about 2 behavioural tools. The first one being personalised timely prompts for people to act at moments when they're most likely to be receptive. And I'm first going to highlight this with an example of a project that we ran across several years. This project was run with PensionWise and Liverpool, Victoria, and it was set up as a randomised control trial testing the impact of replacing a standard wake-up pack, which, as many of you will know, can be up to 100 pages of everything you could possibly want to know about your pension and your pension's freedoms, and replacing that with a one side of A4 paper called the Pensions Passport. And as you can see here, there were several behavioural elements to the Pensions Passport. It was personalised, it was extremely simple, but it had all of the most important information that people needed to contact PensionWise and engage in open market options. And it had a really explicit call to action of what people needed to do next. And what we saw was that this had a huge impact on how engaged customers were. What you can see on this chart is the proportion of consumers who were visiting the PensionWise website. And on the left, you have the control group, where you had around 1% of people engaging with PensionWise resources. And then the group that was sent the Pension Passport, that increased tenfold to almost 11%. This was also mirrored in an increase in the likelihood of people calling the PensionWise hotline, around a 3-fold increase. And we also did a follow-up survey where people said that the people who received the Pension Passport were around 24% more likely to say that that information prompted them into action or reflection, and 13% more likely to find knowing who to speak to was easy rather than hard. And as I said initially, that one of the missions of the Behavioural Insights team is to run randomised control trials like this so that we can test not only the concept of, yes, it does seem like a good idea to send a pension passport, but in fact, at quite a specific level, how effective is this and what kind of return on investment are you getting from this simplification and this change in communications? And it's been really encouraging for us that partly based on this evidence from the trial, the FCA in their retirement outcomes review is proposing to roll out the pension passport across the industry. And the simple annual statement, which I believe you're going to hear more about across the course of the conference, is based on similar behavioural principles of simplification, saliency and personalisation. And that will hopefully help boost engagement during people's working lives and the accumulation phase as well. And now I'm going to move on to an example from a completely different market, the energy market. In 2015, the Competition and Markets Authority ran an investigation into the retail energy market, where they found that almost 10 million households across the UK could save over £300 a year by switching energy supplier. But despite that, switching rates were extremely low. So we partnered with Ofgem, the energy regulator, to test some different forms of communications and prompts to help people engage with the market and switch their energy provider. And I'm going to highlight one of those trials for you now. So this was what was called the cheapest market offer letter trial. And on the right-hand side here, you can see an example of the cheapest market offer letter. And what it did was tell people specifically for their household how much they could save, what the top 3 deals in the market were for them, and gave them all the contact information and tariff information that they needed to easily switch their provider. And again, we tested this in a large-scale randomised control trial to see what the impact of that prompt was. And what we saw is that in the control condition, again, extremely low baseline levels of engagement, around 1% of people switching over this 30-day period. Where that letter came from the energy regulator, we saw that more than double. And then where the letter came from the person's own energy supplier, it tripled. And so this is an extremely low-cost, effective intervention, and one that Ofgem and everybody else was very pleased with, and is being tested in different forms to think about rolling it out more broadly. And really what this brings us to is, what is the role for timely prompts in engaging members? And what I'd like you to go away with is to think that prompts are a low-cost and effective way to boost engagement. You should definitely use them as part of your engagement toolkit, particularly focusing on making those existing touch points you have with your members, like annual statements, as effective as possible. But what you can also see from these examples is that the baseline level of engagement is very low. So even where you have extremely effective prompts and communications, they're not really shifting the dial enough to be proclaiming that you're at a good level of member engagement. So you need to supplement them with other behavioural tools. And I think that the best way to do that is to design smart defaults into the pensions journey. Defaults are one of the most powerful behavioural tools that we have. We all have a strong tendency to go with what's preset for us because it's easy. It's easy to do that, and it doesn't require much effort from the individual. So making an option a default makes it much more likely to be adopted. And really this is important across the whole pensions journey. As I've already mentioned, it's extremely important at the enrolment stage, but also the defaults that we set there tend to stick through the accumulation phase. So people are sticking with the default contribution rate, and people are sticking with the default asset allocation. And what we see in previous behavioural research is that actually, if people had been asked to choose their contribution rate, many people say that they would have selected a higher rate. And there's been a very interesting recent study where the authors found that actually, even at higher default rates, people weren't opting out of their pension. This was done in the US. And the opt-out rates didn't significantly increase until you got really quite a long way away through that contribution curve. So overall, erring on the high side when choosing a default rate is less likely to generate unintended consequences than erring on the low side. And thinking about how to implement this within providers, there is, as many of you may be aware, a scheme called Save More Tomorrow that was designed by two behavioural scientists, Richard Thaler and Shlomo Benazzi. And really the essence of this scheme is that once people are enrolled, they choose a preset cap for their contributions. They say, I would like to go up to 15%. And then their contributions will automatically escalate in line with their pay rises. And they do that so that people never see a drop in their take-home pay, which taps into what we call loss aversion. And it escalates right up to the point where they reach that preset cap. And that inertia that I've talked about keeps people in the scheme. And I think there's a lot of room to be implementing these types of smart defaults within schemes. So in conclusion, I've touched on some behavioural tools, prompts and smarter defaults that you can use to both engage and improve situations for your members. But there's also levers that I haven't explored, like tapping into information about responsible investment and asset allocation. And really, there are huge untapped opportunities to apply behavioural insights across the pensions journey. Personally, and the Behavioural Insights team, we'd love to do more in this space. So I'd be very keen to hear in your questions and in discussions afterwards about what of this is resonating with you and what you think you could do more of with your members. So, thank you.
Thank you.
So why are we looking at Danny McCaskill going down the side of the Isle of Wight? Isle of Skye, actually. It wasn't Isle of Wight at all. Isle of Skye, there you go. What do you think that has to do with pensions and savings? By the way, who's actually seen that video? A few hands? A few hands? You and 60 million others have watched that video. It was uploaded to YouTube 4 years ago by Red Bull. It was never advertised, but 60 million people downloaded it. And I guess the point of the story is what we have in common with that is digital is really disrupting, demonstrably disrupting, the way that we consume communications and information. YouTube now is the largest advertising channel in the world. It's only 10 years old. It now has and captures the most revenue. At the same time, that the way that we consume social media, on average, people with children in the room will know, I've got 3 young boys, on average in the UK, teenage children spend 7 hours a day on their mobile devices. Our world is very, very different. You might have also noticed when they were filming Danny doing that, there wasn't a helicopter. They were doing the video through a drone that was connected to his watch. And that technology is about 3.5, 4 years old. It was literally coming out just as they were doing that video. And in my case, I'm sitting here running a retail digital business with Aviva, and I look at it and think, all right, does that really interact with me? Hell yes, it does. Because I look at the way that we do general insurance in the UK, and already today, 75% of the 10,000 sales that we will do today will be end-to-end, digital online, largely through the use of AI. And I guess you might be asking yourselves, will it disrupt pensions and savings? And my answer would be, hell yes, it will. And it's going to come quite quickly. And for one reason, more than anything, 2/3 of all of your customers find insurance and pensions simply confusing. They don't get it. They really don't get it. And the second part of that story is not only do they not get it, they feel not rewarded. Loyalty in the form of pensions and savings, 2/3 of people also said they don't feel rewarded for being with a provider. And I guess that's the challenge that we all have, is how do we engage those customers in a world where it's just hard work and full of digital. And I guess what I want to do in the next little while is talk you through a story of how Aviva has approached this over the last 3 or 4 years. We made it our mission, our absolutely mission, to create a beautifully simple and rewarding customer experience. And really, I want to rewind it for you and go through this. We're far from perfect, but over the last 3 or 4 years, we've gone through this journey, and it's one I'm going to share with you today. And I guess where it starts and Richard talked about it earlier on, was that it wasn't just changing the journey, it was a realization that we needed to think very, very different about who we were. Because here's the truth. You are not the customer. I am not the customer. This room does not look like the UK population. And we needed to think very, very differently about how we listen to the customers in order to get a beautifully simple experience. So we spent, in our case, in our journey, we went out and talked to thousands of customers and spent 4,000 hours with customers listening to what they said about pensions and savings. And here's a sneak preview just on what they told us. Yes, we all know the gig economy and all the rest have lots of jobs. They're not the only ones, but on average, people expect to change jobs now under the age of 30 2 or 3 times. That might be slightly more over 30 to 40, but people now expect to move around and change jobs. What that means is that on average in the UK, people have about 4 pension pots. And they told us they know where 2 of them are, roughly. The other 2 are out there, they remember working for them, but they don't really know the experience anymore. And typically the experience is a very large pile of paper dropped through their mailbox. When we looked at that, they also said that 47% of people never even bothered to open the mail. They just binned it. Of the balance of half the people that did take the time to open it, half of those people just looked at the balance and then binned it. Yeah. They just felt it really, really hard. When asked how would they like to consume communication, 2/3 of them said they would like to self-manage. Another 2/3 said they'd like to do it online as well. We didn't just stop there though, because we realized a big chunk of this, understanding the customer, was also understanding the business side of it, because a lot of customers said the employer has a responsibility here. So we also went out and had a chat to 300 different corporates. We did 200 workshops, 12 hacks, and from that we learned an enormous amount. And once again we're reminded we are not the customer. We are not the customer. What we found out was a big chunk of what the corporates were now wanting was wellness, well-being, which was slightly alarming because we had none of that in our pension scheme. So we tried to uncover what this well-being thing was. And what the corporates were telling us was that when they had a really engaged workforce, what they found was they had 1/3 less absenteeism. Their productivity was up 21%. And well-being included financial, it included health, as well as part of their pensions and retirement. So at that point, we've got the insights on the customer, we've got the insights on the corporate, we now started to look at what we were doing and realizing that our proposition set and our product set really wasn't cutting it about 3 or 4 years ago. Part of it, the first step, was to sort out the data. This is not exactly a picture of our data set, but it wasn't far away. We had 72 core systems. None of them were linked, and so we couldn't see a full picture of a customer's experience. We spent about tens and tens of millions of dollars creating a data lake with over 1 billion pieces of data in the middle of it. In the process, we now have 700 data scientists who start to make sense of that data and put it all together for us into what we would then start developing agile propositions. About this point, I think it's probably worth actually showing you sort of what came out of all of that. So, all going well here, I'm going to slightly change over and actually show you, essentially, far from perfect, but where we are at the moment in terms of that experience. If I can get the production room just to switch me over, we'll do a live demo. Okay, so as I said before, what we learnt in terms of our workplace is corporates really wanted to be part of the solution, really wanted to be part of the solution. So when you come into the workplace site, the first thing you see is your label at the top of it. Obviously, Windsor Airlines are fictitious, but go with that for a second. So you see yourself as part of it. Straight away, what we saw and what we realized was that a lot of people just want to see what they have because they don't understand what they have. So in this case, you can see there's pension, health, well-being, there's offers because they don't feel very loyal, and there's some life. Now, straight away, people's eyes are looking for the balance, and we want to solve that straight up, and Elisabeth said that. You want to tell them the balance. But what you see is you start to scroll down, and what we learnt was well-being is now that's something we've brought through to our proposition. Well-being's a big part of it. In that case, you pop into well-being. In this instance, you've got some, what have we got here? Hangover cures for work, maybe some for tomorrow. You've also got things, I know in our own case, our own scheme, people love the good old challenges against their work peers and colleagues, and you can go in and do different plans. All of this is put through a partnership that we have with a wellness provider. Further on down, what surprised us, and this is a key part of the engagement story, was we did something called a GP doctor application. A few of you may have heard about this. GP doctors was a big part of the wellness program, especially something there called repeat NHS prescriptions. So if you know 3 million people in the UK have to go regularly to a pharmacist to get a prescription done. You had to physically go there and authenticate yourself. Through the app, we can take that away. You can do it through the app and you can get it delivered to your door, which gives people's time back. Part of time they didn't have to spend, they can do something else or look after their wellness or go something else, spend it with family. But I guess that's part of a wellness program, is being financially fit as well. Now, of course, you see all the financial well-being calculators, all the rest, and you all know that stuff. If we go back to the wicked problems we were looking to solve at the beginning, though, 2 wicked problems I talked about. One was that people changed jobs. And as an insurance provider, part of the challenge there was, how do I keep track with them? When they changed jobs, I lost the connection because you'd lose the HR email. So what we've created in here, by clicking on the top, is you change your profile to an individual profile. So the profile follows you. So we don't lose connection with the customer. So if they have 3 or 4 jobs, they'll have 3 or 4 pensions. The key thing is it's really, really easy. Then you go back to where you are in the workplace. The second wicked problem was, as an existing customer, you always seem to give the new shiny toys to new customers, never to existing ones. I want to see the discounts as part of my workplace program. So we started to build in programs and bundles into the workplace offer. So in this case, because we know you, and on average we have about 5,000 data points on you, right across health and GI and pensions and so on, we can start putting pre-populated offers into you with discounts that are just for your employer. So in this regard, all of a sudden the experience is starting to feel less confusing, a lot less paper, all in one place, and you can get to it just by logging in with your fingerprint. Still, we're in the business of pensions. And this is what we learned about pensions, and I'm a massive fan of Elisabeth and the teams in terms of behavioural scientists. We have a team of behavioural scientists that made us rethink how pensions really work. So here we are, here's our pension details. If I click in there, the first thing you always want to see is that balance. Got it. The second thing we tend to do is give people lots of charts and graphs, and what we learned from the behavioural science side of it is they get completely confused very, very quickly. And so we tended up trying to layer information. First of all, basic information. As you get more and more into it, then you start to build layers of detail that people can intuitively follow. And in our case, through digital and data, at the moment, every day, we go through 25,000 different tests of A/B testing on the site to see what ones work and what ones don't. When we see something that works, we double down. If it doesn't work and people get confused and drop out of the journey, we walk it back out of the site. I guess, and that's some of the sites of digital that bring a lot of benefits. And as you go through into it, you start to lay it in. Transfer a pension pot. Okay, we know people struggle with their pension pots. Make it easy. Here's a transfer of pension. Players like Pension B do a good job of this as well. Your policy beneficiaries, if you have to change. All of this is getting back to the heart of it, which is creating that beautifully simple experience. But the learning for us was by listening to the customer, what we thought we were in the business of, which was all about pensions, all about charts. We actually learned we're in the business of well-being, and that was a very different place to be. If I can just flick back to the pack, that would be great. Another one too is the part of this, that was the individual side. The corporate side was critical, really, really critical. In a time when you've really got to compete hard to get new staff on, they found this fantastic. This is a copy of one of their dashboards that we give to the corporate customers that looks overall of all their staff in terms of their well-being. This one looks at BMI, looks at various challenges that staff are taking, what their motivations are. It could be something to do with health, fitness, whatever, in their action plans. But from a corporate point of view, you have a finger on the pulse of what your staff are doing and their well-being status, which is much wider than just pensions. And I guess this is part of a journey for us. You know, we are very much on this journey and constantly playing with tech. You might be sitting here thinking, Alexa. Anyone in the room's got an Alexa? And aside from playing music, right? Good, there's a few people. We spent a bit of time mucking around with this and decided, actually, why don't we put a pension skill on it? And so that when you get home at night, talk to the spouse, have a beer or wine, you can ask it for a pension balance. Now, a lot of you might be thinking, bloody hell, that's not for me. But guess what? There's 100 million Alexas out there. 100 million. Connected is part of our customers. Not everyone's cup of tea, but for a lot of people, they like it. And if it means I can sit on the couch and I can ask for my pension and I get it, or I sit on the tube, or I go to work and I check it out online, okay, that's fine. We're giving customers the opportunity to however they want to deal with us. How's it going? So this is our journey. In the last 9 months, we've onboarded 1.25 million people onto that workplace program, so it's going pretty damn well. On average, we have 150,000 people that log in daily and go and do something, see something, try wellness, do something with their GP doctor, or do something with their pension, add a beneficiary, whatever. On average, people come back 12 times a year, which, okay, it's not Facebook, but the same thing. 12 times a year, for someone, when you say to them insurance and pensions, what typically was an annual statement that got binned quite quickly, 12 times a year is a good place to be. Is a good place to be. That means we've got engagement and a base to work on. And I guess that's, you know, as I sort of wrap this up, that's part of this journey that we've been on. We're far from perfect, but we're testing and learning a lot. And I wind it back right to the beginning. We have got to make this experience just beautifully simple and to reward loyalty. Because 2/3 of our customers find this very, very hard and frustrating. And I guess the way that we look at it is we're having fun with digital, we're having fun with data, having fun with tech. And that's a good thing, and having fun with well-being. And as an example of this, I was on the way up here yesterday and someone said to me, I said, you know, we found out something really, really interesting. Our busiest time of the day, evidently, is somewhere in Bath between 11 and 12 o'clock. That's when we get our most logins. And you might be thinking, why the hell? And they said, well, we have no idea, but it's going to be fun finding out. And that's at the heart of it. Cheers.
Thank you very much, Blair. So we have got some questions coming in on the app already, but we're going to do this the old-fashioned way as well. And you've made the effort to be here, so you can ask some questions. If you've got a question, put your hand up in the air and make yourself obvious to me. While you're still pondering your questions, and perhaps I've got a question just to begin with for both of you, which is, so we want to get engagement, but what's the limit of our engagement? Where, you know, do we really want people to be asking about their balance on their Alexa in an evening or looking at it on the tube? You know, where's the sensible behavioural insight type point where we stop engaging?
It's a great question, and I have a follow-on question to it. So I agree that engagement is a double-edged sword, and you, for example, don't really want people to be changing their asset allocation on a regular basis or perhaps ever. So I think the best thing you can do is set those defaults right at the beginning so that actually if people don't engage, they're still in a reasonable position going through. I'm interested to hear from Blair. You know, it's fantastic what you've done with the Aviva platform. I'm really interested to know, as people are engaging on the wellness side, do you see the spillovers in terms of what they're doing on their pension and whether they are increasing contributions or other things in their pension?
Yeah, two things. I guess we've all got to sit here in a room as an industry, and how do we measure our success? We are the lowest OECD country in terms of a savings ratio at less than 2% versus Asian countries at 25 or 30%. As an industry, whatever we're doing is not working because people aren't saving. So, you know, whether I want kids on their mobile devices for 8 hours a day, I clearly don't, but I also don't want them taking a statement and binning it and not looking at it and giving up on savings or just postponing and procrastinating. So I think we've got to try stuff. We've got to be engaging. We've got to make it simpler. At the heart of everything we do, we have to make it simpler. Look, personally, I'm not going to run home and get a pension skill on my Alexa. But if people want to do it, let them decide. And if it helps them to stay engaged, I think that's a good thing.
Okay. So we've got 3.5 minutes left. I've got time for one brief question from the audience. Number one there, if you could tell us who you are, please.
Hi, yes, I'm Ken Monroe. I'm a pension trustee. I work with TPO, early resolution team, and I'm also a pensioner. So a number of different experiences across there. Two things really, one of which you perhaps just touched on, and Elisabeth might not want to say any more of that. I'll come back to it in a minute. Secondly, what is, and you mentioned yourself, Blair, to start with, the industry should be improving the service. My experience is both personal and with claimants, people through TPO, is that that's not necessarily always the case, and some people are getting bad or extremely bad service from the providers, whose names I won't necessarily mention. So I think the provision industry has a fair bit to do as well. And perhaps you would want to comment on that. And also, I think it's right that everybody should have their own way of accessing it, how their information, however they think it's the right way to do. I'm not entirely sure, and that's the bit I would like to ask Elisabeth, that mixing pensions up with everything else that you put on there, whilst it's valuable, I'm not entirely sure that that's simplifying the pensions issue on its own.
Okay.
Do you want to take that first?
Again, you're not the customer with all respect. Either am I. And I think we've got to look out at the customers and ask them how they would like to do this. Employees and employers are saying, I want well-being. And well-being in my case is being healthy financially, health-wise, etc., and work-life balance. If we can bring it together in one place where they can do that easily and accessible, that's great. The biggest problem we find is people can't remember their log-on numbers, can't get back to it, can't find the statement, can't remember their policy details, and they just put it off. You know, you can't forget your fingerprint. You can log in online or onto an app and you can see where your balance is. It's that easy. And I guess we've got to try and, you know, make it easy for them and then let them, in an intuitive way, get the information they want and digest it in the way they want.
Happy to forfeit an answer, so we've got time for another question.
Okay, so I've got one question I want to ask from the app, which I think is quite useful as well, particularly where we are, which is around how can we use behavioural insights to stop scamming?
Interesting, yes, absolutely. So we talk a lot about friction, and particularly one of the most powerful things you can do to change someone's behaviour is to make it easy. Make it easy for them to do what you're trying to get them to do, and I think Blair has exemplified that perfectly. In scamming though, you do also want to add a little bit of friction. So friction is a dial that you can turn up or down, and in fact, there may be circumstances where you want somebody to pause and reflect on whether they are about to transfer money to the right person, whether they have really read this communication and understood who it's from, verified that. And so I think there is room to add some friction back into the process to prevent scams.
Okay, I think you'll have trustees with you on that. Blair, do you want to add anything
Yeah,
else?
the only thing I'd say is, and again, it comes back to making it very easy for someone, a customer, to talk to someone. And I'll be the first to say, don't be 100% digital. Don't be 100% telephone. Give people choice. If someone wants to talk to someone, make it really easy. They can get a live chat, they can ring up on a telephone, they can see someone. I think what we're doing is make it really easy for them to quickly talk to someone. And fraud is a real worry in many ways, many ways. And we have a conscious effort as an industry to tackle it.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, sorry, we are out of time. I mean, there were loads of other questions we could have asked as well, but sorry, yeah, we are out of time. So a couple of interesting things I picked up. First of all, it's the first time I've ever heard a data lake. Can you swim in a data lake? I don't know. Secondly, Windsor Airlines, fictitious. I booked some flights.
Really?
That was a bit worrying. That's fraud, I suppose. I'm glad you're talking about we are not the customers. That chimes very much with we've got to look out through the eyes of the consumer, through the eyes of the saver. I think that's absolutely the right thing to do. So in a moment, I'd like to thank our speakers. I'd like to thank all of you for coming along. Liz is going to be in the Learning Hub during the tea break if you want to ask her any of those questions that are still lingering on the app, so please do go along and catch her. Steve and his team are going to be on the stage in a moment, but we've got to move some props around, so the stage is going to go dark for a little bit. You're not on your own. We are still here, and bear with us while we do all of that, to stay with us while we get organised. But all it remains to say is to say thank you to these two. Thank you. Well done. Thank you very much, both.